Back in April of 2022, I was riveted by a story on my favorite radio program, This American Life. It was about a Lithuanian guy named Paulius Sinuta, who realized that the media bubble controlled by Russia's President Vladimir Putin was grossly misinforming the Russian public about the war in Ukraine, then in its infancy. Many people in Russia believed Putin's propaganda, that Russians in Ukraine were facing state-sponsored genocide, and that his military operation was simply aimed at surgically removing a fascist government there. They had no idea of the barbarities the Russian army was perpetrating on Ukrainian civilians. Sinuta also learned that all Russian phone numbers were publicly listed. So he and a friend launched a website on which Russian speakers outside of Russia could click a button and call random people inside of Russia to explain to them what was really going on. Battling propaganda, one person-to-person conversation at a time. Within 2 days of going live, the site had logged an extraordinary 32,000 phone calls. However, there was a problem, as Sinuta found out when he started making calls himself. The few that didn't go to voicemail or busy signals that actually connected with a real person met with overwhelming hostility. The person on the other end of the line would hurl abuse at Sinuta, scream, call him names, hang up on him. One even pretended that she was Putin's daughter and shouted for Daddy to come take care of him. A good call was when the person simply listened in silence, but even those were rare. So that was the hard reality. Sinuta had found a way to scale the wall of Putin's propaganda only to confront an even higher, more impenetrable wall, the wall of public denial. The wall that refused entry to any information the person preferred not to believe. Well, here in the States, we have our own experiences with this dynamic, as our incoming president fills his cabinet with people who continue to assert, without a shred of objective evidence, that the 2020 election was somehow stolen. And over a third of Americans believe this. I can't imagine that calling those people randomly on the phone to convince them otherwise would achieve any better result than Paulius Sinuta's campaign has done. And honestly, like many of you who have been trying to resist this slide into factual relativism, I'm feeling a bit exhausted at this point. Inauguration Day lands on Martin Luther King Day, of all things. And my impulse is to go home and pull a blanket over my head. The whole thing seems like a lost cause. Which is why I was so struck by a moment toward the end of Sinuta's story on the radio. In light of how super hard Sinuta finds it to withstand the screaming that he gets on the phone, the interviewer, Elise Spiegel, asked him, "Do you ever feel like it's not worth it and you just can't do it more?" "No," Sinuta says emphatically. "No, there's people who are fighting in Ukraine. There's people who are dying there. People are killed daily. There's like 10 people killed today in the bread line, standing in the bread line." His voice quivers with emotion. How can we not do a stupid phone call? A little bit later, Sinuta acknowledges Most of the things people are doing, this is a quote, most probably will have very little or no impact at all. The other day I was doing flowers together, paper flowers, together with Ukrainian children. Does doing flowers with Ukrainian children will stop the war in Ukraine? Most probably not. But that sense of people coming together and explicitly trying to do something, even if that's futile, it makes us, all of us, stronger. For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent, begins our passage from Isaiah today. And for Jerusalem's sake, I will not rest until her vindication shines out like the dawn and her salvation like a burning torch. I don't know where I will find the energy to not keep silent in the coming days. But I do know that this passage emerges out of a community that has experienced exile from the promised land to Babylon. I do know that Isaiah here promises a reversal of fortune that indeed did take place. To borrow from Psalm 126, those who went out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, came home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves. I do know that much can change from one year to the next in the political fortunes of a nation. And I do know that, as Sanuda puts it, coming together and explicitly trying to do something, even if that's futile, it makes us, all of us, stronger. As for Paulius Sanuda, even though he was hard put to discern any kind of impact of his phone calls on Russian public opinion, he did notice on his website's analytics that the provenance of those calls shifted over time. Spiegel reports, at first, calls were mostly from where he was, Lithuania. But soon, he and his colleagues noticed it was spreading, the idea hopping from one country to the next, until they saw that Russian speakers from all over the world were reaching out to the people inside Putin's bubble. They'd seen the same problem Paulius had, and they were all trying their best to solve it with him. Amen.